and replaced by Himmler, who was very violent, and he was originally a chicken farmer, just as a side note. But Diehl's downfall was that he bought into the notion that government violence and terror were important tools. On page 118, he said, the value of the SA, the stormtroopers, and the SS Gestapo, seen from my point of view, Inspector General responsible for the suppression of subversive tendencies and activities, lies in the fact that they spread terror. That is a wholesome thing. So in Diehl's view, violence and terror were valuable tools for the preservation of political power. He bought into that. He drank the Kool-Aid. Eventually, darkness overtook the whole government in Germany, not just Hitler. Diehl's feared for his life. He told stories about how everyone, let's see here, it says on page 119, everyone in the Nazi hierarchy distrusted everyone else. How Göring and Goebbels loathed each other and spied on each other. How both spied on Diehl's, and how Diehl's and his men spied on them in return. So there began to appear in a vast and complicated network of espionage, terror, sadism, and hate, from which no one, official or private, could escape. Not even Diehl's. All right. Now, page 150. Speaking of Ambassador Dodd, he said, initially, I had no delusions about Hitler when I was appointed to my post in Berlin. But I had at least hoped to find some decent people around Hitler. I am horrified to discover that the whole gang is nothing but a horde of criminals and cowards. See, Obama isn't just a pawn, and no dictator is. They are a piece of a machinery, and that machinery gets out of control. I'm sure that there are elite people in our government and in corporations and in the banks that think they can control Obama. The elites in Nazi Germany thought the same thing of Hitler. They thought they could control him. Franz von Papen, who was the vice chancellor, he was the protege of President Hindenburg. See, Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. And many people in Germany saw that Hitler was a problem, but they chose the path of cowardice. Now, this is what Papen said. He said, well, Papen and his fellow associates, the elites, imagined they could control Hitler. He said, I have Hindenburg's confidence. Within 2 months, we will have pushed Hitler so far into a corner that he will squeak. It was possibly the greatest miscalculation of the 20th century. And as historian John Wheeler Bennett put it, not until they had riveted the fetters upon their own wrists did they realize who indeed was captive and who was captor. So, dictatorships are unstable. And dictatorships believe their own fairy tales. Ambassador Dodd had to publicly confront Vice Chancellor Papen on why we as Americans entered World War I. And Papen was so overcome with the fanciful thinking that occurs when people are drunk with power. If you go to (192), well, the story's on page 188, where they have this public disagreement as this reporter Schultz is asking questions. And even though Dodd himself was a pretty mellow guy, he stood up because he was a history professor and corrected the chancellor. in public. And it says here that Messersmith, who was one of our other officials there, he observed that even smart, well-traveled Germans will still sit and calmly tell you the most extraordinary fairy tales. So there was a collective stupidity in Germany among their own elite. I mean, they come to believe in their own power as if it's legitimate, as if this state or this thing can continue on. And you see that in the spending of our government, for example. They really think that their fairy tale power can carry on. But this, you would think, one of the things that you might conclude is that Papen would have hated Dodd after he was publicly called out, but actually the opposite happened. This is page 192. Instead of embittered estrangement between Dodd and Papen, there grew a warm and lasting association. From that day on, Sigrid Schultz observed, Papen himself cultivated the friendship with Ambassador Dodd with the greatest assiduity or persistence. Papen's behavior toward Schultz also improved. He seemed to have decided, she wrote, that it was better to display his Sunday manners toward me. This, she found, was typical of a certain kind of German. Whenever they come up against someone who will not stand for their arrogance, they climb down from their perch and behave, she wrote. They respect character when they meet it. And if more people had shown firmness to Hitler's handymen, Papen and his acolytes in everyday contacts as well as in big affairs of state, the Nazi growth could have been slowed up. So they realized that even back then. You know, the problem is the longer you let this police state grow in America, the worse it's going to become. The TSA and police will become more perverted because perverts will seek the jobs in those agencies where their perversions are protected. This is on page 251. The Nazis realized the same things. This is the head of the Gestapo, Rudolf Diels, before he was forced out because he was not harsh enough. Listen to this. If you're not harsh enough or ruthless enough in a police state, somebody more ruthless will force you out. This is what he had to say in 1933 about the violence. And remember, this is the same guy who a year before, this is in 1934, okay? In 1933, just 1 year prior, he had been the head of the Gestapo. But at this point, he has had to flee Germany for his life. And in reflection, this is what he said. The infliction of physical punishment is not every man's job. And naturally, we were only too glad to recruit men who were prepared to show no squeamishness at their task. Unfortunately, we knew nothing about the Freudian side of the business, and it was only after a number of instances of unnecessary flogging and meaningless cruelty that I tumbled to the fact that my organization had been attracting all the sadists in Germany and Austria without my knowledge for some time past. It had also been attracting unconscious sadists, i.e. men who did not know themselves that they had sadist leanings until they took part in a flogging. For it seems, and finally it had been actually creating sadists. It seems that corporal chastisement ultimately arouses sadistic leanings in apparently normal men and women. Freud might explain it. So, as you allow the TSA and the DHS become more brutal in the airports, and I'm going to share a couple stories of that, they're going to become worse, and the people who would normally be in prison for crimes of violence will actually get jobs in those agencies. So here's a good example of that. This is a headline you can search. Women suing state troopers over roadside cavity searches. I'll share the link. Deals was right. The more we allow police to be perverts as a duty, the more perverts will pursue jobs as police officers and be hired. So you can see in that video where the police officer, it's a female police officer, reaches her hands into the anus and then into the vagina in the pants of these two women with the same glove, and one of them actually got sick and they're suing them for that.